Most people think Social Security is simple. You work, you retire, you collect a check, but there's much more to it than that. Social Security is actually one of the most misunderstood programs in America. When should you claim? How much will you receive? What happens if you pass away? Can children collect benefits? What happens if you're working while actively collecting benefits? Today, I'm going to break down the fundamentals of Social Security, and we're going to talk about one of the biggest decisions you're going to make in retirement. Welcome to Demystify, where we bring clarity to everyday financial decisions. So what is Social Security? Well, it was established in 1935 by FDR, and it's designed as a retirement income method for Americans. It is funded through payroll taxes, and the current workers are the ones that are actually paying for those that are currently on Social Security. So how much are you actually contributing to Social Security? Well, it is 6.2% that you are putting in from your gross pay, and 6.2% that your employer is also putting in on your behalf as a part of your gross pay. So combined between the employee and the employer, 12.4% of your paycheck is going towards your Social Security benefit. Social Security was never designed to replace 100% of your income in retirement. Typically, for most people, it can replace anywhere from 20 to 40%. So how exactly do they calculate what that benefit is? So what they do is they take a look at your average index monthly earnings. And what that is the average of your highest 35 years of income. It is adjusted for inflation, and it is creating an average of those 35 years. Now, if you don't have 35 years of working, then you're going to have some zeros in there. So for example, let's say someone was working for 30 years and they had 30 years worth of eligible Social Security earnings. They're going to have whatever the average is of those 30 years, plus they're going to have zeros for those other 5 years. So as you're working, you're either replacing zeros, or if you're making more than you were at some point along those 35 years, you are replacing those lower numbers. So the more you make during your working career, the more you're actually going to be contributing towards Social Security, and the higher your benefit is. It is important to note, however, that they do cap you. So earlier I mentioned that 6.2% of your paycheck is going towards Social Security. There is a limit to that. Once you exceed $184,500, and that's in 2026, you are no longer going to have to pay in that 6.2% to Social Security. So it's important to note, if you are a higher income earner, at some point you will receive a pay raise, a take-home pay raise, I should say, because you're no longer putting that 6.2% in. What I often will encourage people to do is make an account on the Social Security website. That will allow you to see where you're at, look at a statement. On the note of a statement, one thing I always like to explain to my clients is that the numbers that you see on there, like if you see the benefit chart, it'll say you're 62 all the way through 70. The numbers that you see on there assume that you made whatever you made in the prior year all the way up until those ages. So that age 70 number that you're seeing on there is assuming you made whatever you made last year all the way through your age 70. So the most accurate number you'll see on the statement is going to be your age 62, because that's the closest to you. So what happens if you collect at the different ages? The earliest that you can begin collecting your own benefit, not on disability, is age 62. That is the earliest that you'll collect your own benefit. The average that I was talking about earlier is calculating your full retirement age amount, which is anywhere from 66 to 67, depending on the year in which you were born. For most people that have yet to begin collecting, it's going to be their age 67. All of the other numbers that you see for the various ages are actually based on that 67 number. If you take it prior to full retirement age or age 67, it's going to be reduced. If you take it after 67, from 67 through 70, it's actually going to grow. So what does that reduction actually look like in real numbers? Well, if you take it all the way early at age 62, it's going to be a 30% reduction off of what your full retirement age amount was. The nitty gritty of it is that you're going to be reduced by 0.05% for the first 36 months that you take it early, and 0.05% anytime after that, which equates to 30% if taking at age 62. Now, if you delay past age 67, your benefit is going to grow at 8% per year until age 70. Once you hit age 70, there is no reason you should not be collecting Social Security, because it is no longer growing. So let's put some real numbers behind this. Let's say your full retirement age amount is $2,000 a month. That would mean if you began collecting at age 62, it would be a 30% reduction, which means you would be getting $1,400 a month. If you were to wait till age 70 to begin collecting, you would be getting $2,480 per month. There is not necessarily a right or wrong answer when it comes to when you should begin collecting. It really depends on your individual situation, your income needs, longevity concerns. Are you still working? What does your spouse's income situation look like if you're married? One of the most common questions we get asked as advisors is, what is the difference? If I collect early, when am I actually going to be behind the eight ball for collecting early? Because one thing that's important to note, people oftentimes will look at their Social Security statement, they'll see the numbers at different ages, and they'll say, I don't want to collect at 62. I'm getting a much lower benefit. I'm going to wait. But what they don't always consider is that you are now collecting that benefit for all those years that you otherwise wouldn't have been. So let's say you're comparing 62 versus 67, which are very common ages that people like to compare. You need to keep in mind that from those 5 years that you are collecting from 62 to 67, that is income that you would not have otherwise had. As a general rule of thumb, I'm not going to dive into the numbers of the actual break-even ages, but if you're comparing 62 versus 67, it's the break-even age is typically going to fall in your late 70s. That means if you were to be living past age 79, for example, you will have been worse off for collecting at age 62 because you would have received more over the long haul if you were collecting at 67 with that increased benefit. What that does not factor in is any sort of growth on those assets, because you could, in theory, be collecting your Social Security at age 62 and investing those funds over that time period. Now, I know a lot of people sit there and say, Nick, that's not fair. If I'm taking income, I'm going to spend that income. But what that also means is if you're bringing more income in, that is less that you're drawing from your various assets that are in fact invested. The break-even age tells you when the checks catch up, but does not take into account your specific situation and is not going to be the end-all be-all. On the note of collecting early, what happens if you begin to collect before your full retirement age? Well, you're going to have limits as to how much you can make. Round numbers, it's about $2,000 a month. So if you are collecting prior to full retirement age and you are making more than $2,000 a month, your benefit is actually going to be reduced. For every $2 that you go over, your benefit is going to be reduced by $1. So it is important to keep that in mind if you're deciding to collect Social Security while you're still working. It might not be worth it because you are losing some of your benefit. What about if you're married? There are different rules for Social Security if you're married. I want to first start with the spousal benefit. What the spousal benefit will allow you to do is collect a benefit based on your spouse's Social Security. So as long as you've been married for at least 1 year, or if you're divorced, you were married for at least 10 years, you can actually begin to collect a benefit based on your spouse or ex-spouse's overall benefit. The way that it works is you are entitled to up to 1/2 of your spouse's full retirement age amount. So what do I mean by that? Let's say your benefit would have been $500 a month, but your spouse's benefit at their full retirement age is going to be $3,000 a month. Well, as long as you're married and both collecting, you would actually have the opportunity as the spouse with the $500 benefit to get stepped up to $1,500, which is 1/2 of your spouse's overall benefit. It is important to note that number is going to be reduced if you start collecting it early. You're only entitled to 50% of your spouse's benefit if you are of full retirement age when you begin collecting. So we've talked about the spousal benefit, but what about the survivor benefit, which is another factor that goes into Social Security? This comes into play if your spouse passes away. It is important to know that the higher of the two benefits always remains. So in that same example I was just using, if you're collecting $1,500 and your spouse is collecting $3,000 and your spouse passes away, you would have the ability to be stepped up to the full $3,000 and your $1,500 benefit would go away. The earliest that you can begin collecting the survivor benefit is going to be at age 60. And the reduction is a little bit different than it was for collecting your own benefit. Whereas the others were 0.5% for the first 3 years, 5/12 after, the survivor benefit is going to be straight line from 100% to 71.5%. So if you're anywhere along there, it's going to be adjusted accordingly. The 100% would be if you are at your full retirement age, not your spouse that has passed away. There are also survivor benefits for minor children. If you pass away and have minor children, they actually may be entitled to collect up to 75% of your full retirement age amount. Now, there is a family maximum for that, so it's important to note that if you have 10 kids, for example, they're not all going to be getting 75% of whatever your full retirement age amount would be. And it's important to note, once they turn 18 or 19, if they're still in high school, they are no longer going to be receiving that benefit. One of the common misconceptions that I see when talking to clients about Social Security is going to be how exactly it's taxed. Many think Social Security isn't taxed, when in fact it certainly can be. From a very broad standpoint, the most amount of your Social Security that will ever be taxed is 85% of your gross amount. Now, that doesn't mean you're paying 85% tax on it. That is just the amount of your Social Security that will go on your tax return. It is possible, however, that none of your Social Security is taxable. It really all comes down to the other income that you have, whether that's through working, whether that's your investment accounts, retirement accounts, pensions, any other income that you are receiving while collecting Social Security is going to impact how much of your Social Security is taxable. It is really important that people are aware of this, and this is where tax planning really comes into play, and why whenever you're doing any kind of financial planning for yourself, or if you're working with a financial advisor, you need to make sure that they understand how all this fits together. So today we covered how your benefit is calculated. What is Social Security? What happens if you collect it early? What happens if you collect it late? How your benefit is calculated? What are survivor benefits? What are spousal benefits? And how is Social Security taxed? Social Security is one of the few retirement decisions that you're going to make that you really only have one shot to do. Now, you do have the ability to do a one-time do-over as long as you stop within the first year that you begin collecting. But in general, the decision that you're making is going to be a permanent one. So you really need to take everything into consideration before making that decision. The difference between claiming strategies can make the difference of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime, and potentially even more if you're factoring in a spousal or survivor benefit. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. And if you know anyone that is approaching retirement of Social Security age, thinking about collecting Social Security, please send this video as it may be able to help them out. I really appreciate you joining me today. And if there's any other topics you'd like to cover, please feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to cover them. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Demystify.